The worst night of my life started with cheap champagne and a forced smile. Nexus Security Partners had just landed the largest contract in its history, and our CEO, Julian Croft, had rented out the top floor of one of Austin's fanciest downtown hotels to celebrate. From the panoramic windows, the city looked like a circuit board, a glittering map of power and money. And at the center of that map, holding court, was Julian. He was a master of the universe, a tech world celebrity in a tailored suit, with a charisma so intense it felt like a gravitational pull. People orbited him, laughing a little too loud at his jokes, hanging on his every visionary word. And right there, shining brightest in his orbit, was my wife, Monica Vance, Vice President of Business Development. My boss, technically, by about 4 levels of corporate hierarchy. We started at Nexus together, two hungry kids fresh out of college, coding in a cramped apartment that always smelled like burnt coffee. Back then, we were a team, Liam and Monica against the world. But her career had gone supernova while mine, well, I was still in the trenches, a senior threat analyst, a glorified coder. I was the guy who actually understood the nuts and bolts of the systems she sold for millions. She was polished, ambitious, and moved through this world of power brokers and CEOs like she was born to it. I always felt like I needed a visitor's pass. "Isn't this incredible, Liam?" she'd said earlier, squeezing my hand, her eyes sparkling with the reflection of the city lights. "We did it." We. I just nodded and tried to look like I belonged. Now, a couple of hours and 2 glasses of flat champagne later, that feeling of being an outsider was a cold knot in my stomach. The party was getting loud, the laughter slurring at the edges as the open bar worked its magic. I was watching Monica from across the room, seeing her talk to Julian. It wasn't the first time, of course. They worked closely. But this was different. There was an intimacy in the way they stood, a shared space that seemed to exclude everyone else. Then they were gone. It wasn't a dramatic exit. They just weren't there anymore. I did a slow scan of the ballroom. No Julian, no Monica. The knot in my stomach tightened. Have you ever had that feeling? That deep, gut-level certainty that something is wrong, even when you can't prove it? Let me know in the comments if you know what I'm talking about. It's a physical sensation, like a cold dread spreading through your veins. I told myself I was being paranoid. This was a work event. They were probably in a quieter room, talking strategy. It's what ambitious people did, but I couldn't shake the image of them on the balcony earlier. It wasn't a kiss, nothing so obvious. It was an intense, private conversation, their heads close together, the city lights painting them in a dramatic glow. It felt like I was watching a scene from a movie I wasn't supposed to see. I started walking, casually at first. I checked the main balcony, empty, save for a couple of junior analysts taking selfies. I circled the bar, then the lounge area. Nothing. The hotel's executive suites were on this floor, reserved for the top brass for post-celebration strategy sessions, as the memo had so delicately put it. Most of the doors were closed. My heart was starting to pound now, a dull thud against my ribs. "This is crazy, Liam," I told myself. "You're being jealous and insecure. Go back to the party." But my feet kept moving, pulling me down the quiet, carpeted hallway, away from the noise. I paused outside the first door. I could hear loud music, probably just more party overflow. The second door was quiet, the third same. Then I got to the fourth door, at the very end of the hall, the presidential suite, Julian's room for the night. The door was closed but not quite latched. A tiny sliver of light cut through the dim hallway, and I could hear voices, a low murmur. Her laugh. I recognized Monica's laugh instantly. It was the sound that used to be my favorite thing in the world. Now it made my blood run cold. I didn't plan what I did next. It was pure, raw instinct. I moved closer, my shoes silent on the thick carpet, until my eye was pressed against the cold wood of the doorframe, peering through the crack. The scene inside was lit by the soft glow of a single lamp. Julian had his back to me, but I could see Monica perfectly. They were standing near the window, a half-empty bottle of something expensive on the table beside them, and they were kissing. It wasn't a friendly, celebratory kiss. This was hungry, desperate. His hands were tangled in her hair, pulling her head back. Her hands were roaming his back, clutching at the fabric of his expensive shirt. I watched, frozen, as his hands slid down her body and hers moved to the front of his pants. It felt like the world had stopped turning. My whole reality, the 15 years we'd spent building a life together, was dissolving in front of my eyes through a 1-inch gap in a hotel room door. And then it got worse. He whispered something in her ear and she smiled. A slow, complicit smile that I had never seen before. Then she sank to her knees in front of him. I couldn't breathe. I physically could not draw air into my lungs. A sound escaped my throat, a choked, strangled gasp. I didn't want to see anymore. I couldn't. I stumbled backward, away from the door. My hand clapped over my mouth to stifle the noise. I turned and ran, not walked. I ran down that hallway, past the closed doors, past the distant sound of the party, a party celebrating a success I now realized was built on a foundation of lies. The elevator ride down felt like an eternity. I kept seeing it, the image seared into my brain, the way she looked at him, the way her hands moved, the final soul-crushing moment before I fled. The drive home was a blur. I don't remember a single turn, a single red light. All I could see was that sliver of a view into a room where my life was being dismantled. I got home to our empty house, the house we bought, the life we built, and the silence was deafening. I walked into my home office, my sanctuary, and collapsed into my chair. The man who left for that party hours ago was gone. He'd been replaced by this hollowed-out shell, filled with a toxic cocktail of grief, rage, and something else. Something dark and unsettling that I couldn't yet name. That night, sleep was impossible. Every time I closed my eyes, the scene played on a loop. His hands, her smile, her on her knees. Over and over. A part of my brain, a sick, twisted part, replayed the details with a disturbing clarity. It was like watching a train wreck. Horrifying, but you can't look away. And a tiny, shameful voice in the back of my mind whispered that it was fascinating. That the sheer audacity of her betrayal, the raw power in that moment, was almost intoxicating. I hated myself for it. I wanted to vomit. I shoved the feeling down, telling myself it was just shock, just trauma. Oknis, I muttered to myself in Russian, a word my grandfather used to say. Wake up. Come to your senses. This wasn't something to be fascinated by. This was war. That night, sitting in the dark, surrounded by the ghosts of my dead marriage, I didn't just mourn. I started to plot. The betrayal wasn't just personal. Monica was my superior. Julian was my CEO. They ran the company I had dedicated my life to. And a cold, terrifying thought began to form in the wreckage of my mind. If they could lie to me so completely, what other lies were they telling? That question would change everything. The spark of suspicion wasn't just about an affair anymore. It was about nexus. I had a gut feeling that what I saw through that door wasn't just the end of my marriage. It was the key to destroying their entire empire, and I was going to be the one to light the match. Part 2, the digital trail. The days that followed the party were a masterclass in deception. I was a ghost in my own life. I'd come home from work. Monica would be there, acting like nothing had happened. She'd ask about my day, kiss me on the cheek, and the casual intimacy of it felt like acid on my skin. She was good, polished, convincing, and utterly without remorse. She looked me in the eye and lied with every breath. And the scariest part was, if I hadn't seen it myself, I would have believed her. I played my part too. The quiet, overlooked husband. The meticulous coder who kept his head down. But beneath the surface, I was a different person. The grief was still there, a constant, dull ache in my chest. But it was being overshadowed by something else, something sharper. Rage. And that rage needed a direction. It found one on a Tuesday afternoon, a week after the party. I was doing a routine diagnostic on our core security software, the so-called bulletproof solution we sold to clients for millions. It was grunt work, sifting through millions of lines of code, looking for inefficiencies. And that's when I saw it. It was just a fragment, a piece of dormant code tucked away in a dusty corner of the library. To anyone else, it would have looked like leftover junk from a deprecated build. But I knew our code base better than anyone. I knew its history, its architecture, its every little quirk. And this fragment, it didn't belong. It was elegant, sophisticated, and deeply malicious. It was designed to infiltrate, to hide, and to wait. It was the digital equivalent of a sleeper cell. I'd never seen anything like it in our official software. I named it Reaper. My heart started hammering against my ribs. This code had no legitimate purpose. Its only function was to cause chaos, steal data, lock systems, create a crisis. Why was it in our library? That night, I waited until Monica was asleep. I slipped out of bed, went to my home office, and logged into the Nexus servers. And this was risky. Every keystroke, every file access was logged. But I was meticulous. I built a simple cloaking program, a digital ghost that would mask my tracks, making my activity look like routine system maintenance. My first target, Julian Croft's office server. I started searching for any outbound traffic that wasn't going to a known client. It took hours of painstaking work. But then I found it, a series of heavily encrypted data packets sent from Julian's personal terminal to a cluster of servers that, after some digging, I traced to an anonymous hosting service in Eastern Europe. I looked at the timestamps of the transmissions. There was a pattern, one every few months, going back 2 years. My blood ran cold. On a hunch, I opened a web browser and started cross-referencing the dates of those transmissions with news reports of major corporate data breaches. The first date I checked was from 3 months ago. The day after the transmission, a promising mid-sized tech firm in California reported a catastrophic data breach. Their systems were crippled, customer data stolen. They were on the verge of an IPO. The breach nearly bankrupted them. Then I searched for who came to their rescue. The headlines praised the heroic efforts of a cybersecurity firm that swooped in with a rapid response package and saved the day. That firm was Nexus Security Partners. I checked another date, 6 months back. Same story. A different company, a different city, but the same pattern. A mysterious, crippling cyber attack followed by Nexus, the White Knight, riding in to sell them an incredibly expensive solution. I leaned back in my chair, the pieces clicking into place with a sickening finality. This wasn't just a scam, it was a digital protection racket of immense scale and sophistication. Julian wasn't just a ruthless CEO, he was a master arsonist who sold fire extinguishers. They developed the virus, Reaper. They targeted growing companies with everything to lose. They deployed the virus and waited. Then Julian would activate it, creating chaos. And the very next day, who would call the devastated company, offering the perfect tailor-made solution? Monica's business development team. The Harvest Protocol. That's what they called it. I found the name in a fragmented, encrypted project file linked to Julian's terminal. It was a cold, calculating, and utterly brilliant scheme. They created the crisis and sold the cure. And Monica, she wasn't just a passive accomplice. She was a key player. She identified the targets. She made the heroic sales pitch. She was a true believer in Julian's ruthless philosophy. She hadn't just cheated on me. She had cheated the entire system, betrayed every ethical line we were supposed to uphold. Her ambition hadn't just destroyed our marriage, it had made her a federal criminal. As I sat there staring at the screen, the image from the hotel room flashed in my mind again. Her on her knees before him. The image had haunted me for days, a symbol of my personal humiliation. But now it looked different. It wasn't just about sex, it was about power. It was an act of fealty, of a loyal subject kneeling before her king. The disgust was still there, but now it was mixed with that same dark fascination. The sheer scale of their arrogance, their godlike power to create and solve crises at will. Part of me was horrified, and another part, the part I refused to acknowledge, was in awe of the sheer audacity. I shook my head, pushing the thought away. "Orkness," I whispered again. "Wake up." This wasn't the time for a twisted psychological analysis. This was the time for action. The anger returned, cold and clear. The desire for revenge was no longer just about a broken heart. It was about justice. I couldn't go to the board. They worshiped Julian. I couldn't go to the police, not yet. My evidence was circumstantial, a digital breadcrumb trail that only I could follow. They would deny everything, and Julian's internal security would wipe the servers clean before any official investigation could begin. I would be fired, discredited, and silenced. No. I had to build an airtight case. I had to assemble every piece of evidence, decrypt every log, and connect every dot until the picture was so clear that no one could deny it. I wasn't just going to expose them. I was going to burn their empire to the ground. And from the ashes, I would build my own. That night, I registered a domain name, axiomshield.com. It was a small act of defiance, a promise to myself. Axiom, a statement or proposition which is regarded as being established, accepted, or self-evidently true. I was going to build a security company based on truth, the exact opposite of Nexus's predatory model. This side project wasn't just about restoring a house or finding a hobby. It was about forging a weapon. Axiom Shield would be my ultimate revenge, not just tearing them down, but proving I could build something better, something honest. The game had changed. This was bigger than Liam Carter, the betrayed husband. This was Liam Carter, the threat analyst, facing the greatest threat of his career, and I was going to hunt it down. Part 3. The Alliance. For the next few weeks, I lived a double life. By day, I was Liam Carter, senior threat analyst, fixing bugs and running diagnostics, nodding quietly in meetings where Monica and Julian discussed aggressive growth strategies. By night, I was a digital archaeologist, digging through the ruins of their ethics, piecing together the skeleton of the Harvest Protocol. I was making progress, but it was slow and dangerous. Every unauthorized query, every decrypted file was a risk. Julian was smart and paranoid. He had internal surveillance systems that were second to none. I knew it was only a matter of time before he sensed a leak. The wall I finally hit wasn't digital, it was historical. To prove that Reaper was developed internally, I needed access to Nexus's old development servers, servers that had been decommissioned years ago. The access logs were a fortress, and I didn't have the key, but I knew who might. David Chen. The name surfaced from the back of my memory like a ghost. David had been our top engineer, a true prodigy, even more brilliant than I was. Julian had fired him 2 years ago for insubordination. The official story was that David had a bad attitude and couldn't work in a team, but the rest of us in the trenches knew the truth. David got too close to something. He asked too many questions about Julian's pet projects. Now I knew he hadn't just been close. He must have stumbled right onto the foundations of the Harvest Protocol. Finding him wasn't easy. He'd fallen off the grid. No social media, no professional profiles. He was a digital ghost. It took me a week of cross-referencing old employee records with public databases to find a possible address in a rundown part of East Austin. The man who answered the door was not the confident, swaggering genius I remembered. This David was gaunt, with tired eyes that darted nervously around as if expecting an ambush. He was working a low-level IT job for a local school district, a ghost of his former self. "Liam Carter," he said, his voice raspy. "What do you want?" "I need to talk to you, David, about why you were really fired from Nexus." He tried to slam the door, but I was faster, sticking my foot in the frame. "It's about Julian's pet project," I said, keeping my voice low. "The one you got too close to. I think I know what it is." That got his attention. He hesitated, then reluctantly let me in. His apartment was sparse and messy, with takeout containers piled up and an old computer rig humming in the corner. He was clearly paranoid, and with good reason. Convincing him was one of the hardest things I've ever done. He thought I was a trap, a setup by Julian to see what he knew. I had to carefully lay out what I had found, sharing just enough evidence to prove I was for real without revealing my entire hand. I showed him a snippet of the Reaper code. He stared at the screen, his eyes widening in recognition. "My God," he whispered, "he actually did it. That son of a bitch. He actually did it." David confirmed everything. He'd seen the early stages of the Reaper malware, a theoretical project Julian was working on with a secret off-the-books team. When David started raising ethical flags, Julian shut him down. When he persisted, he was fired, smeared, and blacklisted from the Austin tech scene. Our alliance was formed right there, in that dusty apartment, fueled by a shared desire for justice. David was cautious, but the anger in his eyes told me he was in. He still had his old admin credentials for the legacy servers, hidden away on an encrypted drive. We became a two-man conspiracy, communicating through secure, anonymous channels. David, from his bunker of an apartment, would access the old archives, while I, from inside the belly of the beast, would correlate his findings with Nexus's current activities. Just as we were making real headway, the cat-and-mouse game began. Julian sensed something was wrong. An internal memo went out announcing a company-wide security audit. It was a witch hunt. Julian knew there was a mole, and he was determined to find them. The pressure inside Nexus became suffocating. Julian's internal security team started monitoring employee activity with a terrifying level of scrutiny. I knew they were watching me, watching everyone. One wrong move, one suspicious file transfer, and I was done. To create a diversion, I had to do something that went against every instinct I had as an engineer. I deliberately sabotaged one of my own projects. It was a minor security patch I was developing, nothing critical, but I introduced a subtle, hard-to-find bug. When it was discovered, it created just the kind of internal chaos I needed. All eyes turned to the sloppy coding of Liam Carter. I took the heat, sitting through humiliating meetings where managers questioned my competence, with Monica sitting right there, a look of disappointment on her face that was so perfectly feigned it made me sick. It was a gamble, but it worked. The audit focused on my mistake, and it bought me the time I needed. While the company was distracted, David found the smoking gun. Deep in the archived logs, he found the original source code for Reaper, time-stamped and credited to Julian's secret development team. He also found early, unencrypted email chains where Julian and a younger, more eager Monica discussed potential beta test targets for their new market disruption tool. The evidence was damning. It wasn't just a breadcrumb trail anymore. It was a superhighway leading directly to Julian and Monica. We had the source code, the list of victims, and internal communications that showed their intent, their strategy, and their utter lack of morality. We compiled everything into a single, devastating package, a digital bomb. The question was, what would you do with it? Would you just walk away, or would you see it through to the end? Drop a comment and let me know your thoughts. For me, there was only one choice. I couldn't just walk into the FBI office. Julian had connections everywhere. We had to deliver the package in a way that couldn't be traced back to us until it was too late for them to cover it up. We set up an anonymous tip to the FBI's cybercrime division, a dead drop in the digital world. We sent the package, a multi-gigabyte file containing years of corruption, and then we waited. We had armed the bomb and started the timer. Now all we could do was hold our breath and wait for the explosion. Part 4, the takedown. The days after sending the package to the FBI were the most nerve-wracking of my life. Every minute felt like an hour. Every email from corporate, every casual hello from a coworker in the hallway felt like a potential threat. I watched Julian and Monica looking for any sign that they knew what was coming. Nothing. They were arrogant, untouchable, basking in the glory of their latest success. They had no idea the ground beneath their feet was about to open up and swallow them whole. The announcement for the all-hands company meeting came a week later. It was going to be a company-wide live stream, a victory lap for the big contract. Julian Croft on stage in his element, celebrating the very empire he'd built on lies. It was the perfect stage for the final act. On the day of the meeting, I worked from home. I couldn't bear to be in that building, to be in the same room as them. I sat in my sparse home office, the one that now served as the headquarters for Axiom Shield, and pulled up the live stream on my monitor. The stream opened to a packed auditorium at the Nexus headquarters. Hundreds of employees cheering and applauding. The energy was electric. Monica was sitting in the front row, looking up at the stage with an expression of pure adoration. She looked powerful, successful, and beautiful, and I felt nothing. The love I'd had for her had been burned away, leaving only the cold ash of betrayal. Then Julian walked onto the stage. The applause was deafening. He was a rock star. He stood at the podium, smiling that charismatic million-dollar smile, and began his speech. Today, he said, his voice booming through the auditorium, we celebrate not just a new contract, but a new era for Nexus. An era defined by our bold vision, our aggressive strategy, and our unwavering commitment to protecting our clients from a new generation of digital threats. The irony was so thick I could barely breathe. He was talking about the very threats he had created. I watched, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs, my eyes darting to the corner of the auditorium on my screen, waiting. He was halfway through a sentence about integrity and trust when it happened. The doors at the back of the auditorium opened. Two men in dark suits walked in, followed by several others. They were calm, professional, and moved with a purpose that cut through the celebratory atmosphere like a knife. The crowd began to murmur, turning their heads. Julian faltered, his words trailing off. He squinted into the lights, a flicker of confusion crossing his face. The men in suits didn't stop. They walked right down the center aisle, straight toward the stage. They were federal agents. Two of them walked up the stairs and onto the stage. One approached the podium. "Julian Croft?" he asked, his voice calm but firm. "Yes," Julian said, his charisma finally failing him. He looked small and confused under the stage lights. "You're under arrest." A collective gasp swept through the auditorium. The agent took Julian's hands and placed them behind his back. At the same time, two other agents approached the front row. They stopped directly in front of Monica. I watched her face on the screen. The adoration turned to confusion, then to dawning horror as one of the agents leaned down and spoke to her. She shook her head, her expression crumbling. The camera zoomed in as they asked her to stand, and a stunned Monica Vance, the brilliant vice president, was escorted out of her front row seat. The live stream was chaos. People were standing, shouting, pulling out their phones. The camera operator, to their credit, stayed on the stage, capturing the moment Julian Croft, the tech visionary, was led away in handcuffs. I didn't cheer. I didn't smile. I just watched. I watched the empire burn. I watched the whole corrupt, rotten structure come crashing down, live, in front of the entire company. The aftermath was swift and brutal. Nexus security partners collapsed in a matter of days. The tech world was shocked. The news was filled with stories of the Harvest Protocol, the brilliant and brazen fraud that had fooled everyone. Monica, facing serious federal charges, tried to make a deal. She tried to pin everything on Julian, painting herself as a pawn in his game. But the evidence I had compiled with David, the emails, the source code, the target list with her annotations all over them, showed her deep, willing involvement. Her ambition had been her downfall. My life, on the other hand, was just beginning. A few weeks after the raid, I got a call. It was from the CEO of the California tech firm that Nexus had victimized, the first one I had investigated. The news of my anonymous tip had leaked, and my name was now attached to the takedown of Nexus. "Liam Carter," he said, "I read about what you did. It took guts. I also read about your new startup, Axiom Shield. We're in the market for a new cybersecurity provider, one we can trust." It was our first contract. Today, I'm still sitting in my home office, but it's no longer sparse. It's the bustling headquarters of a growing company. Axiom Shield is building a reputation, not on fear and deception, but on integrity and trust. We're creating truly defensive systems, the kind that protect companies instead of preying on them. My ultimate revenge wasn't just watching them fall. It was building something better from their ruins. It was professional succession. Every now and then, when I'm working late, the image from that hotel room still flashes in my mind. The kiss, the intimacy, the final, devastating moment. It doesn't sting with the same raw pain anymore. The disgust is there, but the dark fascination is gone, replaced by a quiet sense of closure. That image, that betrayal, was the catalyst that burned my old life down, but it also forced me to build a new one, a better one. They thought I was just a coder, the quiet guy in the trenches they could overlook and betray without a second thought. They underestimated me, and in the end, that was their biggest mistake. I didn't just win, I rebuilt the entire game.